I'm Tina Sprague, President and CEO of GFA Federal Credit Union, and we are a proud sponsor of the Burns and Levinson 4th Annual Cannabis Symposium. These are certainly exciting times for all of us, and as the cannabis industry continues to boom, demand for hemp and CBD has skyrocketed in recreational, industrial, and retail spaces. Our panelists will discuss the current state of the market, legal developments, challenges entrants face, and paths to new opportunities.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and I'd like to thank all of the people who are attending and our great sponsors, and for those panelists who, like myself, had to get up super early this morning because we're not on East Coast time. So anybody who managed to make it with us, we certainly appreciate your participation, because we know that all the topics that we're talking about are affecting businesses nationwide, not just on the East Coast. So we appreciate your participation. As Scott and his panelists talked about in the last discussion, certainly the legalization of industrial hemp under the 2018 Farm Bill has affected the industry in many ways. However, there continues to be uncertainty in the market, and especially in the legal and regulatory areas. And in some ways, in my opinion, that this continued uncertainty makes this market more challenging than cannabis, because there are so many areas that still remain uncertain. So today what we're going to do is work with my panelists and hear some of their insights into the market and what they're experiencing, because we have experts who are actually operators, but also those who advise the industry. I'm going to go ahead and introduce my panel, but I'm just going to do a brief introduction, and if anybody wants more information, because all of these panelists are experts and they're generous with their time, so if you need to contact them, you have any other questions, you can access their full bios under the panel materials that we've provided, and that'll help you get in touch with them if you need to know more about them. So I'm going to start out with Bruce Bernstein. He is the CEO of Ubix Processing, and as CEO of a Colorado-based CBD processing company, he's responsible for running all facets of the enterprise, which provides private label CBD products to manufacturers throughout the country. We also have Darren Coffin. He's the principal and founder of Pisanke LLC, and Pisanke is a consulting firm that specializes in outsourced financial management services and economic development for industrial hemp and cannabis for Native American tribal governments and communities. We also have Julie Lerner. She also is from Colorado. She's the founder and CEO of Pan Exchange. Pan Exchange is a web-based negotiation and trading platform for physical commodities. We also have Sean Hauser, who is the chair of the Vicente Cedarburg Hemp and Cannabinoids Department. She's also co-counsel for one of the plaintiffs that have brought suit against the DEA related to its recent interim final rule related that implicates hemp processors. So we'll hear more about that later. And finally, last but not least, we have Dave Neundorfer, who is the CEO and co-founder of Open Book Extracts. It is, Open Book has some very unique consumer products right now, and Open Book is a certified GMP manufacturer of premium plant-based cannabinoid products. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and start with Julie. Can you please provide us some of your insights as to an overview of what's happened in 2020 from the start to kind of where we are right now with respect to maybe pricing and what's different from where we started, and maybe what you're seeing and you think may happen going into 2021.
Sure. Is my microphone okay? Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So, well, thank you very much. I should point out too that we have a negotiation and trading platform, but we also have the leading benchmark pricing service, and that is as a result of our vetted network of hemp players, growers, processors, trade houses, and end users. We do not take prices from brokers or industry analysts or so forth. So I hope I'm not too much of a Debbie Downer today. But just to give you a very brief history of legal hemp, from July of 19, when it was at its peak, biomass, until last May, or this May, May 2020, biomass prices fell 84%. And then what happened, there was still a surplus. Farmers were still not able to get the crop sold, so they entered into tolling agreements. And these were all varying kinds of agreements with regard to price, and most of them were profit sharing, so that they actually still didn't price the biomass yet. They did a profit share when you sell the crude or when you sell the broad or full spectrum distillate, they would get a portion of that back. So from January 2020 to end April, here's what happened. Winterized crude fell 32%. You just see this oversupply getting pushed all the way down the supply chain. Full spectrum distillate fell 20%, broad spectrum 30%, isolate fell 30% as well. And now we're into the second crop year. And prices have leveled off a bit. Activity has too. It's been quite light with regard to trade. Not much is moving, and a lot of it still continues to move through tolling agreements. So I'd like to give you, my background is more in physical commodities in general than specifically hemp. So if I may give you some food for thought about the size of this market. Last year, first legal crop, the entirety of that crop could fit into 2 vessels of wheat or corn. Wheat, corn, soy that was leaving New Orleans and going off elsewhere. Those are 60,000 ton vessels. And the entire crop was less than that. This year, we believe that crop has diminished by more than 50%, which is a good thing. There's just too much of it. The reality, we do an annual December supply and demand assessment. Last year, based on public data, we realized that Charlotte's Web got to $95 million in revenue off of less than 500 acres. That's a small farm. I've heard, we haven't substantiated it yet, still early days, but I believe it is much, much less than that this year, probably less than 100. The reality is for CBD, a little bit goes a very long way. The excitement came from the high retail price but only droplets of actual hemp in it. And also talking about the difference between cash crops, corn, wheat, soy, it's also worth noting that last year biomass was worth $1,400 at its, near its peak per ton, whereas corn and soy were in the low 200s. So what am I saying here? CBD market is wonderful. It's a unique market in the sense that it's not, I always say, it's not like the fish oil industry that's got a marketing campaign to tell you why you need fish oil. Everybody here, everybody knows CBD is amazing and wonderful and it works. But by volume, it is an ingredient market. The future of hemp, in our opinion, is grain and fiber, which is food, animal feed, textiles, bioplastics, and the like. That by volume will dwarf the hemp for CBD volumes.
And are you seeing entrance into the hemp grower space for those areas that you see where the demand is going to be?
This year, yes. and very rapid increase in interests. In fact, this month we just started benchmarking true hemp and hemp grain. And the interesting thing is, before it can become a cash market that's liquid and robust, we need to figure out the specifications that work. Feed growers need very specific protein and fat compounds. Levi's and Patagonia needs a very specific quality to make cotton-like hemp. Those things are still getting worked out. And then the farmers need to go back and show that they can produce that specification in high volume the next crop year. So that's the point that we're at on those markets.
And are you seeing the growth in any one part of the country, or is it spread out?
It's looking pretty spread out throughout the country. It will be, I think, known by the end of this year. Like looking at Great Plains, maybe more involved in the fiber and grain side, but I think it's still too early days. I think CBD will always be in pockets serving its region.
Okay. And what about for the growth for those other industries that you were talking about? Are you seeing that in any way? Like, is Kentucky still a leader, or are there other states or tribal nations that are starting to gain more presence?
Kentucky is down dramatically from last year, as far as planting goes. However, it's a little ironic, but I don't think hemp will ever go away in Kentucky due to the tobacco industry and the need to fill that void. I think it's still too early to tell. I think everyone is still trying to figure it out. As you know, same as cannabis, a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of M&As, and I think those that come in on the grain and fiber side will be the industrial farmers, the ones that are already quite familiar with corn, wheat, and soy.
Okay. So, Sean, I want to go ahead and talk about, that's the overview and the market overview that Julie just gave us. Can you help us with a legal overview? So 2020 was supposed to be industrial hemp's year. The USDA's rule came out. We thought we'd see some clarity, or we hoped to see some guidance from the FDA regarding CBD and CBD ingestible products, that sort of thing. But like everything, I mean, 2020 has been a unique year. So can you kind of give us an overview of the legal landscape from where we started to where we are right now, and maybe where you think we're going to be going?
Sure. Really, I think most expected that 2 years after the legalization of hemp, we would have finished product regulation. This authority was delegated to the FDA in the Farm Bill, and they haven't acted. They're still, purportedly evaluating the safety and efficacy of CBD products to potentially reform the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and haven't done so yet. And I think the lack of FDA regulation and the resulting state patchwork, is a root issue contributing to, the industry struggles and, the kind of market factors that were just described. And, of course, their position right now is CBD is not legal in food and dietary supplements, but they haven't enforced their position except in the limited case of companies making drug claims. So in the absence of their enforcement, the markets continue to grow, and states have stepped in to regulate, and this has resulted in a state patchwork, with different manufacturing standards, different allowances for product types, different packaging and labeling. That's really impossible for businesses to keep up and comply with, for regulators to enforce, and really for consumers to understand. Some states are even going so far as to put dosage limitations on CBD, which should really be, something the federal agency does. And it's just getting very, very difficult in practice. So I think the FDA issue has been, really challenging for the industry. And of course, it takes time to come out of decades of prohibition. But I don't think folks expected it would take FDA this long. The other issue, as you mentioned, was, of course, we got the long-awaited federal production rules, the USDA rules, but they contain a number of stringent provisions that make hemp production high risk and more cost intensive for farmers, and have resulted in less participation in the program, and frankly the destruction of a lot of crops, and wariness by investors. And it's really the problematic provisions in the IFR result in the areas where they try and regulate around the THC content, and where it's clear there was kind of DEA and ONDCP concern about how to handle THC that potentially goes above the 0.3% limit. And so the IFR contains stringent requirements around testing, requiring DEA testing labs, even though that's temporarily waived, that a total THC measurement, which is more restrictive than the Delta 9 standards that many states have in place, that each lot be tested within 15 days of harvest, that producers will have committed a negligent violation if they produce plants that exceed 0.5% THC, and really just kind of unwelcome and kind of unworkable presence by DEA in these rules. And so because the rules are so problematic, there was a lot of support by Congress and state departments of ags and in the industry to extend the 2014 Farm Bill authority so that there's time to fix these rules. And there's been efforts this year, but of course it's been hard in 2020. So they were successful in getting an extension of the 2014 program for another year, and overall there's 45 states with 2014 Farm Bill research programs which are more permissive, and 13 of those have so far decided to continue under those, and 9 of these 13 or states had approved plans or were seeking approval. So we'll have another year where some states will have more permissive programs, but the majority of others are going to be operating under these stringent rules, and I think it's going to be challenging. But the hope is that USDA is going to be able to fix some of these problematic provisions. And there is concern, by states like Texas who don't have 2014 Farm Bill authority, that it's sort of an unfair playing field where some states are able to have more permissive regulation, and others are stuck with the USDA program. The last piece, which I'll talk more in detail later, is the DEA's IFR, which was purportedly intended to just conform the CSA regulations with the Farm Bill's descheduling of hemp, but it has statements in there that assert DEA jurisdiction over work in progress hemp, and define synthetic in a way that could encompass more than just traditional kind of K2 and spice type synthetics, and is problematic for processors and other producers. So that's created an additional problem for the industry. So really, I think in 2020, we've come a long way in having regulation by various federal agencies. DEA was not supposed to be one of them, and we're lacking FDA regulation. And although there are 2 bills in Congress seeking to amend the FDA to allow CBD to be regulated in food and dietary supplements, they have a small chance of passing, especially in this Congress. And there's also a risk-based enforcement policy that has been with the Office of Management and Budget for months now, and may not get released for some time, if at all. So it's been a challenging year for progress, but I think where we're going is eventual FDA regulation, and I think meaningful reform of USDA regulation in a way that's going to be more operable for farmers.
I think with the extension of the the USDA has given, do you think that the USDA is going to be open to listen to other stakeholders on how to reform the interim final rules so it is more workable for states and Native American tribes?
I think so. You know, the Agricultural Marketing Service is, which implements the Farm Bill program, is very business friendly. They've been really receptive to feedback. You know, I think that the challenge is sort of their obligation to consult with the other agencies, specifically DEA here, where they're sort of hamstrung in areas where they'd like to be more permissive. But I do think, based on, you know, the interactions they've had with states so far and stakeholders, that they're very receptive and considerate of potential solutions. And, you know, by waiving the DEA testing and disposal requirement, they've already taken initial steps to listen and take action.
All right, and how about, you know, the FDA has received a lot of criticism for not issuing regulations related to CBD, but how much of that do you think COVID, I mean, they've been very busy with a lot of things this year, but the COVID issues that they've been dealing with, how much do you think that's played into their reluctance or their inability to issue rules related to CBD has been?
That's a good question. You know, they have a working group. They've had, you know, like I said, it's been 2 years. They've received significant public comment, solicited market studies, and, you know, had that pretty robust public hearing. So it seems that they have the kind of resources and infrastructure allocated to get this done, and it, you know, should have been done pre-COVID, in my opinion. You know, it seems to be more political than COVID related, or just, you know, other disorganization issues. I don't know that COVID's can be blamed for this one, I guess.
All right. So, and thanks, Sean. So, Darren, I'd like to ask you some questions. You're working closely with Native American tribes and tribal governments who are either entering into the space or considering entering into this space. I'm just kind of curious, the ones you're working with right now and the tribes that are considering it, are they excited about the new prospects of entering into hemp that they may bring for the tribes and the tribal members? Or are they hesitant to enter for the reasons that both Julie and Sean have outlined?
Well, certainly before the 2018 Farm Bill, tribes were hesitant because of their federal contracting they do with tribes, and hemp being a Schedule 1 drug. They feared that would put their federal contracting in jeopardy, as well as tribes who were in the gaming industry. They didn't want to commingle a hemp operation with their gaming operation because, again, it's a Schedule 1 drug, and they didn't want to bring into any jeopardy into those. But with the passing of the Farm Bill making hemp legal, more tribes are taking a look, and they are enthusiastic. Most tribes in the United States are rural, and they're in economically depressed areas. Tribes in the United States have access to 56 million acres of land that's underutilized. So hemp would be able to bring economic development in the form of growing, but not also processing. Usually tribes are in only not in the value-added process. They're in the process of growing the product and then shipping it off for someone else to process and be involved in the value-added.
And are you seeing, is there any area in the country where maybe tribes on the East Coast are more interested in this space, or is it more out west, or is it throughout the country?
Yeah, mostly right now, there's a lot of tribes out in the Great Plains area because they do have a lot of open area land that that's not being utilized. There is some interest located near Maine, where I am. A few of the tribes are involved in agriculture, so they're looking to repurpose some of their land that was used for potatoes or blueberries to repurpose that into maybe industrial hemp, because right now the prices for those products are not very lucrative, and the tribes are looking to kind of keep those farms active to provide employment to tribal members. So it varies.
Is the regulatory uncertainty that still exists, is that a factor playing into any of the tribes' decisions that you're seeing, the tribes you're working with right now?
Well, not here in Maine. the Maine program was approved under USDA, but prior to that, Maine had its own industrial hemp program. One of the tribes I had worked with was one of the first tribes to get a license under the state of Maine and operate a small hemp farm on fee land. But now with the USDA giving the state of Maine its green light, the tribes are now, like I said, looking into repurposing some of their old farmland and accessing some USDA funds to help them get those small co-op farms up and running.
Oh, that's great. So Bruce, a question for you, a CBD processor. So we've heard Julie's perspective on the market, Sean's on the legal developments, and Darren's on what the tribal nations are doing. So from your perspective, from a CEO who's processing hemp and who's also been in the past a hemp farmer, what's 2020 been for you and for UVIX processing? I mean, has it been challenging? COVID, has it affected your business as well? Generally, what's it been like for UVIX?
Yeah, well, straight up, I mean, our sales are off by 50%. So that was a challenge, and I had to furlough, half of my staff. But, I think that, interruptions like this are, it's just the way the market moves. I started doing this about 7.5 years ago, and, went out to rural southern Colorado, trying to convince generational farmers, saying, "Look, I swear it's not weed," and until Colorado State University was able to demonstrate that planting hemp eradicates nematodes for potato processors, that's where it really kicked in, because there was that value add. Instead of on the fourth year having a green manure plot where it sits fallow, they were able to have a crop. So, starting with 50 acres, one of my farming partners, he did 2,500 acres this year. And I was having this discussion with Julie last night, but 70% of it was for decorticated, hemp fiber, with Patagonia. And the other, I think 20% was for food, and maybe 10% was CBD. And if you look at the whole commoditization surfing, which I think we've done, we were vertically integrated because we had to. But then I just saw that the market first looked at, let's get into farming. We're going to make so much money with farming. And I decided to get out of that, and I was extracting. And when I was extracting, the cost was about $4,500 a kilo for crude oil. For distillate, it was about $8,000, and for a THC oil, it was about $15,000. And then as I saw, once the price dropped below $1,600, I saw the writing was on the wall, and I stopped extracting. And so, look, what we've always done is, trying to take more of a consultative approach to packaged goods and big box stores and small to medium-sized businesses as well. And where we kind of just evolved into where the value proposition remains is trying to help customers take their half-baked ideas of products they're trying to make and kind of give them more of a program management discipline to help prototype and make products for them. And we kind of got away from the farming and the extraction about a year and a half ago, and now we're just focusing more on research, development, and prototyping, packaging. And this has been a nice niche for us. And quite frankly, I think it saved us, because I think, whether it's the Canadian stock market or Europeans where they invested heavily in half-baked business plans, where one of my favorite lines was, we were working with Irwin Naturals, and Clee Irwin was like astounded at the time. This is about 3 years ago, of why the price of a raw ingredient was so expensive. He's like, it should be around $500. And because he's been in the natural supplements business for so long, he was right? And fast forward, 2.5, 3 years later, it landed right where he thought it was supposed to be. And to me, that was almost like a chilling, foretale of the future. And so I think it's best to almost have some vision and try to get ahead of that curve. And I don't know if it's intelligence or just luck, but we avoided both the farming, even though we took our hits on farming and extraction. We've been agile and we've been resilient, and that's what's keeping us alive.
Were you able to, I don't know if you were able to or not, but
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Was UBIX able to access any of the Corona relief packages that, like a PPP loan or whatnot? Okay, good. So you were able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, so the PPP and the SBA, of course, we had to use all the PPP by mandate, but part of the SBA was we became we literally watched every penny and go through, and we've been able to maintain almost to this date 40% of that loan and just keeping our powder dry. But what I have seen in the past 6 weeks, we've been deluged with new customers, because I do think on the people that were underfunded or had bad business plans have gone out of business, or people on the high side that were overfunded, like a mile high that got $35 to $40 million, and the market collapsed. So I see issues on the high side and I see issues on the low side. So we've been, inundated is a little dramatic, but we've been getting a lot of new customers and also a lot of new investment inquiries over the past 6 weeks, which we survived the storm. Like I tell my team, have pride being a cockroach. We'll survive a nuclear storm, but just being agile and not taking anything for granted has kept us in the game, and I definitely see things turning around.
That's good. It's good to hear too for UBIX. I'm happy to hear that for you. So, Dave, you're also manufacturing CBD products, and I've had the privilege of testing some of them out, and they're very unique and products. So, about I just want to know, in this uncertain regulatory environment,
Katrina, I think I caught some of that question. Are you able to hear me? You were a bit in and out on that.
I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Okay, great. I can hear you now, yes. But I think I know where you're going with that question, and appreciate the question. I think that look, everybody has read about some of the labeling issues and product quality and consistency issues that this market has had during its nascency. And I think that there are two underlying reasons for that lack of consistency. One, of course, is the lack of top-down regulatory clarity that Sean, I think, provided a great overview on. But the other is, an immature supply chain, or what was an immature supply chain. And what happened with those exposés is I think that the brands took most of the blame. But really a lot of those problems originated at the processing level. And what we've seen is a massive shakeout that's happening right now. And Bruce mentioned this, but the three large-scale industrial-scale processors from 2019 have all gone through restructuring. And I think what we're finding is that consumers are more educated. They know where to demand consistency and quality. They know what efficacy from cannabinoid infused products should feel and look like. And I think that's part of what's driving the shakeout from thousands of brands to where we'll land, I think, going forward, which will be hundreds and eventually maybe dozens of brands that capture market share. And so what is happening is there is either a massive pivot from the incumbent processors to embrace the quality control measures that are needed to deliver consistent, safe, reliable products each and every time. And then there are also new processors like open book extracts that were born and founded to address this gap in the supply chain to be able to serve the large legitimate CBD brands, but also the CPGs and big box retailers that are starting to come into the space despite the lack of top-down regulatory clarity. A great example of this organic shift to quality is, I've been at my facility for the last 2 weeks in North Carolina, and we hosted 5 large CBD brands and 1 large CPG ingredient distributor. And the quality assessment and the supply chain audit that were conducted by all of those companies had the same level of stringency. In fact, some of the large CBD brands had more scrutiny assessing our quality management protocol, our good manufacturing practices certifications, which were certified for both food processing and nutraceutical. But then well beyond those surface level accolades and bona fides, they wanted to see the stability testing. They wanted to see product provenance all the way throughout the value chain. And of course, we were prepared to show them all of that, but I don't think that level of scrutiny was in place even just a year ago, with consumers demanding of their brands that, the quality and the consistency that the brands then demand of their processors. And so there's a wave of quality and consistency that's happening organically in this market. That's going to take us most of the way there, but not all of the way there. We still do need and welcome regulatory clarity. In the absence of that top-down clarity, as Sean mentioned, we are having to deal with a patchwork of state-specific regulations, which over the long haul will hinder this market. And with basic good manufacturing practices, quality control, regulation, and basic labeling requirements, that would be kind of the final mile that would complement the organic flight to quality that we're already seeing in the space.
And Bruce, do you agree with Dave? And if so, how has that affected Ubix's business model?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Dave. Dave, I'm assuming you're operating under 21 CFR 111 and 112. That's the assumption. And so,
and 117, yeah.
So that's the thing. Like I said before, getting to a spot and making some educated guesses and using a little bit of vision of getting to a place where you think you need to be is probably the smartest way to go. But it's all about analytics. We've had certain instances where people demand organic, but just because it's organic doesn't mean it doesn't have to be quarantined and analyzed, because there was a big problem last year, and Lauren could probably verify this, with drift, meaning just because you're practicing the utmost in organic practices doesn't mean the guy that's downwind the quarter of a mile isn't spraying and it's not going to hit your crop. Furthermore, when you analyze the raw material, you're not going to see it. Not until you extract it, which you're concentrating it, is when you're going to start seeing the pesticides show up. And so that's why it's critical. Not as much here in Colorado, even though we do microbial testing, but like stuff that's been sitting around in Kentucky or North Carolina, where the humidity content's so much higher, you have to keep it in temperature control, which impacts cost of goods also. But when you have hemp sitting around for a year, another thing we were talking about last night, where a lot of the plant material, the starches turn into sugars. And when you extract it, I don't know about you guys, but we see a lot of sedimentation in the crude oil. And when you go through the distillation phase, you're going to break your glass if you don't know what you're doing. So there's so many arms and legs and situations that you have to be mindful of that can get you into some trouble, whether you're extracting or finishing or packaging.
Well, speaking of trouble, Sean, can you? We're running out of time because these topics are fascinating to talk about, and you guys have so much expertise. But since our time is limited, I have two subjects that I'd like to address. And Sean, one of them is the new DEA rule that's causes problems for operators such as Dave and Bruce. Can you explain that right now and what you're doing as co-counsel to try to address those concerns?
Sure. So the DEA interim final rule, which like the USDA one was effective immediately, issued in August, purported to just make conforming amendments to the CSA following the 2018 Farm Bill's descheduling of hemp. But the rule goes a bit further and indicates that the DEA may be inappropriately interpreting the Controlled Substances Act so that it classifies certain derivatives of legal hemp, specifically, hemp extracts that in the intermediate phase inevitably exceed 0.3% THC before becoming legal final products. It appears that DEA is inappropriately interpreting the CSA and the Farm Bill to designate those as controlled substances. And as such, it, improperly establishes the DEA's authority over legal hemp activities, which is really contrary to the plain language and intent of the 2018 Farm Bill. And it is an uncharacteristic of DEA. This has been, they've had years of trying to assert jurisdiction over hemp, including, naturally occurring THC, where they don't have it, and they've been successfully challenged in court in the past by the HIA, who I'll mention is the primary plaintiff in this lawsuit too. But essentially, because the IFR could be interpreted in this way, it's creating significant ambiguity and potential criminal risk for the processing industry, and is the potential to create significant harm, and it's already had a material effect on chilling investment, on disruption of business operations, and has the risk of exposing processors to potential criminal activity. So, in light of that, action was filed on behalf of plaintiffs, the Hemp Industry Association and Rebotanicals, who's a South Carolina-based company, aimed at clarifying the scope of the 2018 Farm Bill, and with concern that the IFR could effectively recriminalize in-process hemp extract that may temporarily have a higher delta-9 THC concentration, and basically, regardless of DEA's enforcement practices, hemp businesses should not be subject to DEA scrutiny. The Farm Bill expressly divested, DEA of authority over hemp, and the first action was filed as a petition for review in the DC Court of Appeals, asking the court to review and set aside the IFR. A second action was filed, a complaint for declaratory and injunctive relief, alleging the DEA is unlawfully attempting to regulate certain products derived from lawful hemp by misinterpreting the Farm Bill, and arguing that basically Congress deliberately removed this commercial hemp activity from the DEA's jurisdiction when it legalized hemp, and asking the court for a judicial determination that the definitions of hemp and THC in hemp in the Farm Bill include the intermediary derivatives, and that those materials are therefore not controlled substances, and also asking for a determination that the DEA lacks any independent authority to regulate any aspect of hemp production, including these derivatives. So I think it's important, regardless of the enforcement practices, and some statements they've made to understand the actual harm that's already being realized and the intentional harm. And as the complaint we filed highlights, the DEA's 2-decade history of unlawfully attempting to assert their authority over legal hemp outside its jurisdiction. And HIA, as I mentioned, was a primary plaintiff in the past. So this is sort of the latest chapter in DEA's unwelcome presence in hemp. But I think the major difference now is, before we didn't have an actual amendment to the CSA carving out hemp. They always sort of had a hook. We have a very clear, unambiguous exemption in the 2018 Farm Bill to exclude hemp and its derivatives and extracts from the Farm Bill, from the Controlled Substances Act. So that's really the foundation of the case.
Well, we're looking forward to getting some resolution on that. So hope it's a quick resolution in the courts, if that's even possible. So last but not least, and certainly is an important topic, like we heard from Commissioner Hoffman about the push in the cannabis industry for social equity and diversity participation. Darren, I just wanted to ask you about the momentum that's going and if you're seeing that type of push as well within the hemp industry. And if not, what needs to happen? Or if so, what needs to keep going to ensure that there's opportunities that create diversity and inclusion within the hemp industry as well?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the main big challenges is that investors or partners in the industry really don't know who to contact at tribal organizations. Because really tribes operate differently than most organizations. So it's really finding the right contact at the tribal organization where you can really make your inroads. But one of the big challenges I noticed with a tribe that I have a contact with out there, they had some industrial hemp. They bordered the U.S. border with Canada. They had 700,000 pounds of hemp sitting in a warehouse, but no way to process it. They're out in rural North Dakota and Manitoba. No way to process their hemp. So there is a way to make it more socioeconomical is maybe looking at processing on reservations. Reservations have a lot of tax benefits and advantages that probably a lot of folks don't realize. One of them is a 20% tax credit that you receive on all wages and health insurance that you pay per employee. There's accelerated depreciation. Tribes don't pay federal taxes. So you're only paying a smaller portion of federal income tax on the business. You have no property taxes as on tribal lands. So there's a lot of advantages for folks who are looking to offset some of their cash flow problems. Because in the previous segment they were talking about a lot of cash flow issues. Well, there's ways you can work with tribes in order to help stem some of those cash flow issues through working with the tribe, through tax credits, accelerated depreciation, lower operating costs by not paying taxes at the federal and state level. So there's quite a few advantages.
And Julie, are you seeing inclusion and diversity efforts overall in the overall hemp industry as well?
Well, I have to say, I come from international commodity trading and fintech. So in comparison, hemp is unbelievably diverse compared to that world. And it's very refreshing and enjoyable. And, I feel like I'm the Debbie Downer of this entire panel with all the info that I'm bringing. Of course, diversity is hugely important, but I think right now there are so many firms just trying to hang on. To Sean's point about the regulatory issues, until we get regulatory clarity, this market will remain in its infancy and its inefficiencies. You will not see, we hear all the time, I've got a buyer at Coca-Cola. That's just not true. Coca-Cola's, big food, big trade houses, the people that bring liquidity, that take counterparty risk, they're not coming in until more of this is clear. And again, I don't want to belittle the diversity issue, but it's a tough year, and hair on fire for a lot of companies. And unfortunately, maybe I'm just talking about things people don't want to say, but I feel like that's the priority right now, stay afloat.
So I don't think you're Debbie Downer. I think it's a realistic viewpoint and we appreciate it. Sean, no pressure. because we need that regulatory certainty, some clarity. So good luck on that. And thank you to all my panelists and for all your help, your time, and sharing of your expertise. We have another 10-minute break before the next panel starts. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.